The desire to disappear from reality is quite a common desire, and it doesn't need to be as dark as it sounds like. I think most people in this life have thought about just going to bed and wishing to disappear before the morning starts. The difference between wanting to die and wanting to stop being you specifically is what the core of this desire boils down to. Like, you just want to be in a space where you don't have to feel all of this burden of existence, where you don't have to experience all this responsibility, where you don't have to go through every single day of your life that feels like it lasts forever. The issue with awakening to your own conditioning, like seeing that your life might be somewhat of a dream and you are not as real as you thought you are, and all of this is like a clever illusion, is that once you realize this, you might think that you become free from this desire to not want to exist, that you're somehow waking up to the beauty of life. But before this actually happens, most of the time, you actually get shook by even more reality, by even more life, by noticing how heavy it actually is to exist. The ego was actually cushioning you from reality. And once you awaken to the existence of the ego and the illusionary nature of it all, what tends to happen is that it starts to hurt more. Suddenly you see how sick society actually is, how sick you've been, how mistreated you've been, how mistreated we all are, like how society at its core is corrupted by the ego. This is why awakening does not feel pleasant at first. You might have a very pleasant experience in awakening, but then when you come down and also see what it is possible to experience, how free you can be, then the moment you remember yourself back into your identity, it can feel quite stark. It can also feel quite stark after a comedown from a psychedelic trip where you've been in a very blissful state, and then you slowly start to feel the ego coming back online again, and you have to wonder, okay, there is no, like, I'm not going to stay in this way. It's actually going to go back to normal now, and there's like a certain sadness and mourning to it. And before awakening, you might have been numb and functional, and then once it came to be, well, now everything starts to just flow through you, and the numbness might now feel kind of almost like empty or hollow, or you are actually overwhelmed with emotion and feel really anxious and depressed. You might have the feeling that you wish you never started this, like you wish you've never started to introspect the nature of reality or the nature of the ego, and you just kind of want to go back where you were ignorant about these things. You wanted ego death, but you got ego transparency instead. You can see the mechanism now, like you can see how performative we all are, how performative you yourself were, and all of these defense mechanisms you have built. But just because you see them happening now doesn't mean you can just automatically stop them. Like watching yourself lie in real time and then cringing at yourself, but not being able to stop it. The idea of a failed awakening then kind of can start to come up. Like you touched something real and then came back with the ego intact. And it feels like that the process hasn't really completed. So now you are your entire life looking for the completion of this process. Whatever made you feel fulfilled temporarily should be there all the time. There are also a lot of people get this fantastic notion that they should be able to trip automatically whenever they want, and the entire life should just be like this huge psychedelic samadhi meditation experience forever, where you can really see the ego's clinging for some sort of ultimate state that is just permanent and never ceases, meaning that the ego has not really dissolved, right? Now you are seeing more of what is possible and therefore suffering even more or seeking even more. The memory of dissolution, or of like ego death, or where you were at peace with existence, now suddenly starts to almost be like this obsessive memory. Like an old partner you want to go back to, but you can't because they've broken up with you. You're basically stuck between two worlds then. You can't go back to sleep and ignore that life is so much more than what we've been told, but you also are not fully awake because you're clearly still in the rat race and still suffering all of the human condition. It might even be worse than before because now, you have this spiritual FOMO or this existential need to finally be self-actualized or whatever narrative is running in your mind. It's like you see the door to something way greater, but you can't go through. The mechanism behind ego dissolution is a real system. Like, it's not a metaphor. The ego is a pattern of contraction, a way that attention organizes around a sense of me. It can genuinely loosen over time, oftentimes through self-reflection, conditioning, meditation, psychedelics, or deep experience. And there's a certain depth to this dissolution process that once you reach this depth, suddenly you feel like you've woken up to what the ego really is and to what reality really is. But you don't feel certain in it. You're still full of doubt and full of actually uncomfortable feelings. So then the ego doesn't disappear. It becomes transparent and loses its grip sometimes. But it might also just be reinforced in certain aspects because it really doesn't want to disappear and it really doesn't want to dissolve. So then certain other egotistical things like raging at somebody or just being super addicted to something might get worse at first. It's transparency instead of annihilation. And most traditions actually just point to the transparency. The goal is never really to destroy the ego, but to stop being run by it, to not suffer its consequences. It doesn't need you to completely destroy it, but the level of transparency you can gain will feel like some genuine dissolution of your sense of self-identity to a point that you don't yet think is possible. But most people experience a temporary dissolution and then reconsolidation. That's actually quite normal in the circle of dissolution. It's just what happens. The important part is to not get stuck in this process by thinking that you've already completed this process or by forever chasing some sort of high that you think this process should give you. A lot of people mistake the energy of awakening experience with the awakening itself. But it's not about a specific state. It's about a dissolution with all facets of life. Doing psychedelics, you can have 6 hours of no self, and then the ego comes back with a story about what happened. And in a meditation retreat, you can have weeks of peace, and then your life just goes back to normal. Now, the ego has a new trophy. Like, it can say, I had an awakening, or I had an ego death experience, and then it starts to feel special because of these things. But there's a real threshold where attachment genuinely releases. And it's this level of transparency that we are moving towards. It's this sense that you don't need anything to be happy. You don't need any particular experience, nothing to fulfill you, nothing that you need to be yourself, but you are truly detached from all things. And this doesn't mean that you don't enjoy life or that you don't pursue things or you can't have a fulfilling career or that you can't have a fulfilling relationship. But the way you're moving towards these things effectively is by not being attached to these things and not having your happiness depend on them. If your happiness is dependent on taking DMT, it's definitely not what existential peace looks like. The truth is that oftentimes there are like most stages towards is no self-dissolution is very undramatic. Like it's just subtle suffering layers, uncovering slight insights, uncovering new things about yourself, and then sometimes you might hit a core experience, a core memory, something that you thought about yourself very deeply and then realize is wrong. And from there, often there comes a sense of disappointment. Like, oh, I thought I had this already, or I thought I understood this already. And people are then very disappointed I know a lot of people who are very obsessed over the idea of enlightenment have this, because when they then start to get this understanding, oh, there is not really an enlightenment the way my ego is imagining it. Like there is not this endless bliss state that I can occupy in this human body the way maybe some people are selling me to, then there's often a sense of disappointment. And it's very paradoxical, because it's like in order to be in a state that feels more blissful and feels happier, you kind of have to give up this idea in the first place, because this idea makes it so that you're always seeking something that is not there. And by seeking that which is not there, you are basically closing the possibility of it actually happening. Because what peace requires is to not seek. It's to not need something to be different. So what you shouldn't expect is like huge fireworks. Like, oh, wow, this is the thing, and now everything in my life makes sense. These experiences do happen, but you should not chase them. What really changes is not that you get some super high all the time, like the certain parts of the transformation where you do actually feel very blissed out for some time, like through the dissolution process, like independent of any drugs or psychedelics, just pure psychological work, you might feel extremely ecstatic at times. But what really then changes is the relationship to experience itself. Like you can have thoughts and emotions and preferences, but they don't grip you. It's like you feel in intuition to move somewhere, but you clearly notice that this intuition to move is not this egoic need anymore, which I would say is one of the biggest changes. Like you want things, but the word want has changed meaning in a very significant way that you can really just account for in your own experience. When you see that, yeah, I do things without need. Maybe that's the best way to describe it. It's like you don't need things anymore. You can still want them or you can still do them, but it doesn't feel like you need. That's also why I'm very careful now with the language of self-realization, because it creates this expectation for people. Like it becomes its own trap. That's why I like to move towards a more like mechanistic language that describes things objectively and don't make the ego in some sort of magical spiritual project, but to just look at it objectively and not get lost in these narratives that put you into some spiritual hierarchy. Because I do think that spiritual hierarchies are the problem, because they build a new identity out of where you think you are on a spiritual path or on the existential path, which as long as you are on the path, you won't find the exit. The ego loves spiritual goals because that's just the best hiding spot. I'm trying to become self-realized. I'm trying to become enlightened is just a perfect way to never actually be satisfied, to never actually be peaceful. The search for no self is the self's final project. And it's not because it's not real. It's not because it doesn't exist. But it's like in order to get there, you must sacrifice the need. Real death is harmony with reality as it is, including the parts that remain, including some sort of ego reaction or negative emotion that's still there, including the sensitivity that won't go away, including the fact that you might never arrive. The ego doesn't need to die. It needs to stop pretending it's in charge. And you only do this by stopping the need for control and observing honestly. The shift that then comes is truly drastical, is truly incredible, but in a way that it just removes all of these layers of seeking and suffering and dissatisfaction with life. Once the process is close to complete, what you'll feel is just pretty content and good in your body. And once it's fully complete, well, then you move into territories that might be more bliss-like. But to attach yourself to this idea of bliss is just a wrong expectation. It's like the 0.01 percentile go really deep enough to truly destroy the ego. Like if you completely remove yourself of most of possessions and you detach from truly everything you own and stuff, I don't think it is realistic for most people. Most people just want to not suffer. And you can do this way earlier in the path if you do the right things. And you don't need to make this into a story or a narrative or some sort of spiritual competition. It's at the end just about your well-being and your relationship to that well-being. You just need to stop asking for permission to be worthy of feeling great. If you're stuck in the aftermath of something that changed you but didn't quite complete, then this is able to be looked at objectively. It doesn't need to be just a spiritual narrative. The structure of where you're stuck can be seen, and the way to fix it is to gain clarity about what is actually happening in your conscious experience. For a complete ego analysis and more information, there's a link with pricing below.